Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us in our fourth podcast. We have a great guest today, a friend, a great professional. Today's podcast, the name is FinTech, AI, a New Cyber Frontier, a CISO's Perspective on Banking's Next Evolution. And I'm sure that you're going to learn and enjoy what we have for you today. We are joined by a great professional and friend, Earl Matthew. Earl is a CISO for Banco Pichincha Miami agency. He's also a B CISO at Intercredit Bank and a B CISO at Pinvest Capital. Huh?
Correct.
Your hands full, man. You have like 2-3 hands to go over all those positions. Before we start, let me do the disclaimer. So make sure that we have, the legal piece covered. So the views shared in this podcast are those of the speakers alone and don't represent any organization they may be connected to. Everything discussed is for informational purposes only, based on personal experience and perspective. Welcome, Earl.
Wonderful. Thank you.
What can you tell us about your background, man? Tell us about your experience.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's really an honor, privilege to sit with you. It's always
Thank you, man.
It's always very nice to chat with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I look forward to having a chat, right?
Well, yes.
Like you mentioned, I am the CISO at Banco Pichincha Miami agency. Just a little bit of background on that. Pichincha is usually a tongue twister for a lot of people. But Banco Pichincha is the largest bank in Ecuador, and here in Miami we are kind of like an extension of that bank, right? Which is the agency, and also work as the VCISO for Intercredit Bank, which is part of the group, right? The Pichincha group. And Pinvest Capital as well, right? Pinvest Capital being a more of a startup investment and a wealth management company. That's from the background-wise, I have over 15 years, right, of experience in cyber. Mm-hmm. I've worked in multiple industries, not just financial. I have been in the healthcare, cruise industry as well, cruise line industry. I've worked for Norwegian Cruise Line. I've worked as a cybersecurity engineer, cybersecurity analyst. So I've seen things. I have, been in the trenches, and again, it's cyber, as you know, is a very interesting field, right? You have your ups, you have your downs, but it continues to be challenging. And I think the talk that we're going to have today is very significant or very timely, right? With AI and everything that's happening, there's a lot of shift. That's going on right now. So again, thank you for having me.
No, man, thank you for coming to the podcast. And like you said, I'm sure it's going to be a interesting conversation, man. I like your vibe. You have that island vibe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Relax. I like it, man.
Always chill.
Well, you need it for if you have 3 CISO jobs, man.
Yeah, so agreed.
Agreed. You need to be calm and understand what's happening, man.
It's part of the job description. You have to be there.
Otherwise, you go crazy, man. So let's start with the first question, okay? You mentioned AI, okay? And I think this is, you are the right person to talk about this. So 3 weeks ago, the world woke up with the first orchestrated AI attack, okay, to a company called Anthropic. Okay, so how do you see AI-driven threats reshaping cybersecurity strategies in the banking sector, and what capabilities most financial institutions build now to stay ahead of adversaries leveraging increasingly autonomous AI systems?
Yeah, I think Alejandro, this is it's significant what happened with Anthropic, and it's called a watershed moment, I think, because what we saw was AI moving to that place where actions can be taken without human intervention. Okay. And that is the part that I think concerned a lot of, it was an eye-opener and concerned a lot of cybersecurity professionals, because now you have agentic AI being able to accomplish tasks that in the past you would need someone to be on screen, hands on keyboard to perform, right? So now you have AI being able to perform reconnaissance and all the different stages of the attack, okay? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, about 80 to 90% of the attack was able to be accomplished via AI, right? The agentic AI, without any human intervention. That is significant, right? And what is even more significant is the attack took place at machine speed, right? What I mean is, when we say machine speed, this is not something where you have one guy put in this piece of code or this command and have to wait. No, machine speed meaning that everything was done at that computational cycles that it's something that you as a person cannot accomplish with the traditional means. So how is that impacting the financial sector, or what can we do, right? I think the simple answer is we need to find ways, and not just in FIs, but we need to find ways now on how do we combat AI, right? This new frontier with AI. Okay. Simple as that, right?
Yes. Fire with fire.
Yeah, it's kind of fire with fire, but it's let's look at response, for example. We need to be able to automate our response, okay, to attacks. We need to be able to automate our response. We need to make sure that we have the capabilities in place that are AI-powered tools, okay, that can, when such things or deviations or changes are detected, that they can be dealt with rapidly and not just detect, right? I often say to people, for example, when we talk about Security Operations Center, I don't need a glorified alerting system, okay? I need something that is able to, yes, alert, but also I need action, okay?
Gotcha, yes.
So the question is, how do we now put the solutions, the tools in place to have that automation at that AI level that can respond to those threats, right? I think also that as we frame our response or our information security program, things like deception technology should be considered, right? And why am I saying deception? Deception technology here, I'm talking about things like, we talk about the traditional honeypots, honey nets, or dark data, whatever you want to call it. Why I think that is important is because as those agentic AIs are being used by the bad actors, right, to launch these attacks, remember, they're going to go against everything. They're going to look at your network. They're going to look for where data is. One of the advantages, I think, of us having deception technology as part of your stack is it serves as an early detection, right? So anything that touches that data, at least, right, you get that, you could say, high fidelity alert that something is going wrong, something is kind of going awry. And I also think that in combination, again, so we're talking about defense in depth, right? And, But I think it's also critical that as we frame, right, these programs, that we also include and ensure that we are putting in zero trust, right? We're putting in zero trust at the identity level and also at the micro-segmentation level to reduce the blast radius, right? Again, combination, defense in depth, putting those programs in place to ensure that, hey, as we are detecting, we are responding, however, we're still creating an environment where the blast radius is much smaller, right? So again, it comes back to the right investments, Alejandro, I think, and understanding that, look, we cannot be, and I would say this for, and I think this is important, right? When we look at the FIs, right, going back to the financial institutions, a lot of the large financial institutions, I think, are already doing a lot of great things, right? They have the size, they have the budgets. Where I think the strain is in the smaller FIs, right? A lot of times, I think we find ourselves in a legacy state, right? In a legacy state where sometimes management don't really understand that, look, as things are evolving, we need to evolve with them as well.
Correct.
So it's in the smaller banking environment, I think it is crucial that this is taken into consideration, what has happened with Anthropic and the rise of AI. And we start changing and framing our programs to align with what we are dealing with right now.
Great comment, man. I got you provided a few concepts that are, I think, interesting. I haven't heard them before. For example, the computer speed. Mm-hmm. That's a good one to describe how fast these things are happening. And also, like the concept of the security, the layer security, using AI technology on the SIEM piece, I think is important. If we get to the point where your SIEM not always will give you the alert, but also will take like the first few steps, containment, something, it would be a big step on the field.
Absolutely.
Now, so staying on the AI, right? We have this attack. Have you seen on your phishing test? Are you start using because there are some tools that are incorporating AI. So are you using the AI component, and are you seeing any difference on those type of
No, absolutely.
attacks?
And that is actually a great point. And the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay.
Right? Because if we were to just add on, this as we are talking about AI, as you said, one of the things that we're seeing is the AI-enabled phishing attacks. And what I have seen is those phishing emails, they're very convincing, my friend.
Okay.
Right? Very convincing.
Wow. Okay.
And it becomes extremely, because we've told and we've taught people many times, like, look for these spelling errors, or look for these things here, or look for that here. But a lot of those emails that are coming through right now that are built, right, or crafted using AI, they are very professional looking. Okay, very professional looking.
This is scary.
So you take those from the phishing standpoint, and then you also take it from not just phishing, but from the BEC standpoint, right? Business email compromise, and you begin to see, wow, we have some really convincing things coming our way. So yes, absolutely. The approach is really as well to again transition from the legacy way of doing things, right, and trying to prevent these attacks, and ensuring, I mean, I cannot overstate this, that as we engage our vendors for solutions, as we engage our vendors for new tools, from the email standpoint, the endpoint, and you mentioned SIM, or XDR, EDR, whatever we engage in for in terms of our new tools, need to be able to, or need to be up to par, right, or up to the times, let's put it that way, where artificial intelligence is concerned. So the tools that we are bringing on are AI-enabled, right? So they can go into more depth and include that automation aspect as well, to take action. And I mean, folks like Proofpoint have been doing this for a while with their tools, being able to pull emails from the inbox. Microsoft is doing it. But we need to ensure that those tools that we are implementing right now has that AI capability that goes a step further, that can detect those deviations, those anomalies that would be associated with those AI phishing emails.
That's there is a document, a report that talks about the percentage of increment of the effectiveness of the phishing emails, because they have. The quality is getting better. The cost of making them is going down.
Exactly.
So AI really is. I think it's going to create new ways of attacks, but it's also making the old ways of attack stronger, more effective.
Absolutely.
So now I know that you are in the process. I think that you already done it of implementing. Because I think you appreciate the new technology and the new times. You are not you are pro innovation, So I know that you want to implement AI in the banks, right? And you're going little by little. I think that you are in the process of implementing Copilot. No, ChatGPT, right?
Correct.
Correct. So can you walk us through the thought process, what you guys did, where you are right now, what challenges did you face,
Yeah,
good things
so
that are happening?
I think so for any and you know when there are so many different I think when we say AI, so many use cases, so many deployment models, if you will, right? Because you have institutions that are implementing their own in-house AI solutions to be able to crunch data, look at big data, and within their own ecosystem, and be more part of the decisioning engine, right? In this particular use case, the requirement for ChatGPT was 100% business driven,
Okay.
right? And I like to put it this way: in the beginning, there was this fear that ChatGPT, there is a possibility that folks can share more data than they should, but there was also the argument that AI should not be feared, right? We should not be afraid of AI, but we should see it more as a business enabler, okay, to help folks do their work and to do it more effectively. So in the end, the decision, like I said, was business driven, and I think from a cybersecurity standpoint, we're kind of like at a place, Alejandro, where let's put it this way: cybersecurity has always been the no guys, right? Yeah. There's always been no. We can't do this, right?
Exactly,
the risk is too high.
Yes.
What the business is looking for is not for a no guy, but for a business enabler. Okay? And where I'm going with this is the approach is, all right, you want to do it? We're not saying no. We just need to make sure that the guardrails are in place, right? Okay. To enable you to do this. So from a, there are many, again, this is a journey and there are many things that we're still working on. But from a data loss prevention standpoint, ensuring that we have the right DLP in place, the right programs in place to understand data, and who has access to what, the right access control, and the privileges that you have on the tools. So these are things that we had to consider as well, right? As we gave that that green light to move ahead. But again, I think it's still early stages, and still putting everything into perspective and ensuring that we have the right guardrails for tools like ChatGPT. Like that one. And because again, some of the projects I can't speak on now, right? But there are a lot of stuff that is going on, and especially in the area of data, right? Because in the end, this is what we need to protect. We need to ensure that all customer data is protected. We need to ensure that is governed correctly. So this is really where we are, ensuring that proper structure, guardrails are in place to protect it.
Nice. So you're in that baby stage, correct, right? And
I like to say it's crawl, walk, run.
Got it.
Right?
So we're in the maturity process,
exactly.
Early stages, and
exactly.
It's going to be interesting to see how that mature and evolve in the future.
Yep.
So let's change a little bit. Let's move out of AI. Let's go to. I want to talk to you about enforcement actions, man. MRA, matter requiring attention, right? It's not an easy topic, but I know that you successfully finished one that you didn't, you walk into.
Yeah.
The moment that you step into that place in the past, you got into that situation, and I know that between you, the CIO, the CRO, that chief level team, you guys did a great job, man. So without getting into the technical details, tell me or tell us about the experience of walking into that situation, right?
Yeah.
Which was already tense. It was
Right,
stressful.
right.
And how you guys, address it.
Yeah. No. Like you said, it's nobody wants to walk into. Nobody wants an MRA, right?
Period. Exactly. Yeah.
and then nobody wants to walk into and inherit one, right?
Correct.
So of course it's a difficult situation, but I'll tell you, man. I think in the end it's the way that we ended up addressing this is through transparency and constant communication. Okay. And there's one other component to that, but transparency and constant communication and that transparency and communication with the regulators goes a long way. Okay. And with the rest of management. And then another very important component of that is to solve the issue. And I cannot overstate this. To solve the issue, having the right partners, Alejandro, is key.
Okay.
Having the right partners, and I'm talking about partners outside of the organization.
Okay.
The right consultants, the right firms to work with, because through the experience we've realized that sometimes you work with certain partners and the results that you get may not be where it's supposed to be. Okay. So being able to connect with the right people externally, have the right communication internally and with your regulators sets you on that path to really, hit the targets on the issues that you need to resolve. So that I think is really important. So yes, the MRA, nobody likes it, but in the end, it is something that it happens, right?
It happens.
But just having that coverage in terms of making sure everyone is on the same page and that you're hitting those points and having the right partnership really proves beneficial.
I like it, man. Thank you. That was to the point, and it's strict, right? It's I don't think it was that short on meaning the resolution piece, but I think that the summary that you just made is key.
Yeah,
I think
the resolution was long. I mean, and of course I'm not going to go into all the details, right? Yeah. For I'm here, but I mean, it was a very long process. Yeah. It was, so that's why I really, Alejandro, emphasize the partnership is very important. Okay, depending on the MRA, depending on the issue that you're trying to resolve, if you don't have the right partnership within the organization and outside, working with management consistently, making sure everyone is on the same page, and have someone who can really be on your side, right, on the outside of the organization to guide you through that, it can be a very, very difficult situation. Right? So it's
stressful, painful.
Yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
But I'm glad that you guys worked it out, man. And you guys have a good team, so I'm glad that you guys did work it out. Now, so Earl, let me just change. Well, let's start with the regulator, right? So 2025, we had a new administration. There was a lot of changes in different areas, including regulators. Right? We have we're seeing in the industry, in the banking industry, or in financial institution industry, those changes in regulations, in the way that they approach the financial institution, the way that they're approaching examinations. In the past, you would see a PVC list, a request list from the regulators that was extensive, that it was long. Now that's changing. They're not that extensive. They're not. So my question is, what is the feeling? What is what you foresee in the future in that relationship, banks, financial institution, regulators?
That's a good one. Let me see how do I take that one? And I'm going to tell you at least from what I've seen so far.
Okay. Yes. Because let me. I'm also asking you because you have to deal with at least minimum 2 regulators.
Yeah.
I think it's more than that. Or it's just
like well, not it's more than 2.
more than 2.
Yeah, it's more than 2.
Okay.
But you raise an important point, right? In the past, you had regulators, send you that list, right? And you go through it, and a lot of the items were, permit me to say it this way, like check, you got this, right? You got
Okay.
that,
Yes.
check in the box.
Yes.
What I am seeing is that is changing. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I think the regulators they have realized that especially cyber is a really critical area now, right? And they are coming with more targeted questions to the organization on the cybersecurity side of things, right?
Okay.
For example, one of the things that you would expect your regulators to ask is, hey, can you provide us with what you're doing to prevent business logic attacks on your application? What?
Yeah.
Like,
That's technical. That's
Yeah?
picky. That's good.
give us information on all your controls around API security,
Yeah.
right? We want to understand what you're doing in the cloud. We want to. So my point here is, you have the regulators understanding the threat landscape a bit more, okay? And they are bringing in on their side the expertise from a technical standpoint that are now asking the right questions. They're not the wrong questions, my friend.
No,
They are the right questions.
Okay.
But now they're being asked, right?
Gotcha.
So as financial institutions, we need to be aware of this. And we don't want to do this for regulatory reasons. We want to do it for security best practices, right?
Yeah.
But we need to ensure that we prepare ourselves, right? That I say it like this, get back to the basics, from the configurations, from the things that we need to do. Ensure that those things are happening. Ensure that those things are documented. Ensure that we have the right governance over this, right? Because yes, the regulators are going to come, and they're going to come more technical, and you will get some surprise questions, okay? You will get surprise questions, surprise inquiries, and we have to be ready for them. And I'm saying, based on what I have seen, that we should be aware of that.
Which, I think also, because that's one of my perceptions too, right? With dealing with the regulators, and I have mixed feelings. I like it because you have way better conversations, and they might tell you something that you don't, that you didn't know, and say, oh, let me look into that. But it's also a little bit scary, because they are asking, they know what door they need to open, and then you get all the bats out of that closet. I agree with you.
And I think, as we on the conversation with our regulators, everyone in the financial sector should know this, but I'll still state it again, that it is extremely critical to be very open with the regulators. Okay, it's extremely important to be. If you know that you have a program that is in progress, man, don't pretend like it's all done and try to conjure up things that you don't have, right? Be honest. Provide your regulators with a roadmap of what you're doing. Be very honest. And I think there's an appetite for that, right? If you're very clear, if you're very open, rather than trying to pretend what you're not.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Better be honest, man, because if you say that your program is XY mature, well, they're gonna measure you against that maturity.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Okay. Now let's go different question. Okay. Good conversation. Now, thank you for being honest and providing the insights. How would you characterize the current threat landscape facing U.S. financial institutions, and which threat vectors, example, ransomware, supply chain compromise, cloud misconfiguration, insider threat, do you believe the board should be most concerned about over the next 12 to 24 months? Well, we talk about AI. That's a big one.
And that's So it goes back, I think, to the first point that we touched on.
Okay.
Right? The threat landscape. We continue to see, of course, state-sponsored attacks, right? But then we continue also to see attacks from the known threat groups.
Okay.
What is changing, as we said, or what we're in the middle of, is the bar to orchestrate sophisticated attacks is much lower because of AI, right? Okay. So if that bar is much lower, we should expect attacks to be more, prevalent against we talk about FIs, but not only against FIs, but against many other organizations. So again, what I think the major concerns would be, I would call out supply chain attacks, right?
Well, yeah.
That is major.
That's key.
That is major. We look at it's not my concern only, but considering considering the dependencies that we have on our vendors, okay, for security, for different bank processing services, infrastructure.
Yeah.
You look at recently in the news, you heard what happened with CrowdStrike. There's no, but
Amazon a week, 2 weeks before that. Yeah.
Right. So supply chain, I think, is something that is from a visibility of the of the directors of the board, it's critical. All right. And I will shift a little bit and just focus on cyber from the supply chain standpoint. You look at, and I don't want to pick on CrowdStrike, but so I ponder, and sometimes I'm a little bit paranoid about it, because I'm like, man, CrowdStrike is huge. CrowdStrike is everywhere. Can you imagine if something like what happened with SolarWinds would have happened with CrowdStrike? Right?
The impact is the highest.
Okay. And for that reason, for example, I often you have folks who believe in consolidating tools and having, hey, we have this solution or this vendor, let's consolidate everything. For that reason, I think it is so important, Alejandro, to diversify, in my opinion, right?
Yes.
And look, if you are using you have this EDR solution, it's great, it might be the best of breed. But hey, you might want to have something else there, right? In case something goes wrong, at least you have this additional visibility. That's my opinion, right? And there are many different ways of doing things. But going back to I think supply chain compromise is something that should be so the whole vetting process, right, and vendor management has to be taken to a different level. Okay, it's no longer, hey, I have this vendor list, this inventory. I ask them for their due diligence package every year. I just look at the SOC report. I think we have to standardize more that continuous monitoring and that continuous evaluation of critical vendors more so. And we may have to go back and even recategorize who our critical vendors are, because now, okay, if we have a vendor who has some type of footprint in our environment through agents, right? Okay.
That's a good point.
How do you categorize this vendor? If something goes wrong, if there's a compromise on this vendor, you have to assume that you yourself, you're compromised as well. So we have to kind of like relook at how we look at our third parties, right? And how we assess them and how we monitor them and how we vet them. Because just one thing goes wrong on their side, and it could really have a huge impact on the organization. And the other one we mentioned before is the AI enhanced social engineering attacks, right? And I know we beat that a lot earlier, but it's again ensuring that we have those tools, right, that can help us and protect us against those attacks. And then you look at cloud misconfiguration is another one. So if you ask me, then I would tell you in the next 12 to 24 months, these 3 items, I think, and there are more, but if you would ask me to prioritize, I think supply chain, AI-enabled phishing attack, cloud misconfiguration, those are the things. And I mentioned cloud misconfiguration because as we see a shift happening, more and more organizations and now smaller banks are moving to the cloud, right? Moving part of the infrastructure or part of their product into the cloud. And for a lot of them, that is a new frontier, right? How do we ensure that we are managing, right, what is happening in the cloud? How do we ensure that we have the right visibility? How are we getting that visibility? Are we looking at cloud security posture management solutions that we deploy that can give us that visibility? So there are many things that we got to look at this. So for the board, I think those are the key questions that they should be asking. Hey guys, I know that we are moving to the cloud. We need to understand the visibility here and how we're going to manage this. Hey, I know that we have this email gateway in place, but can you tell us what are we doing to enhance it to ensure that we have that detection and response for this new type of emails that are coming, right? So this would be my feedback on that.
That's a good one on the supply, the vendor management, the AI piece is and the cloud. Well, the cloud to me, is separate, but also touches the vendor management piece.
Correct.
And I want to add on what you said. What we're seeing in our client is auditors and regulators starting to ask on your vendor management process, right, program, what process are you implementing to identify what vendors are using AI? And if you know, right, how you change that criticality on the vendors.
Exactly.
Because that's happening a lot, man. You have the vendors putting AI, and nobody knows if it's machine learning, what type of.
Exactly. And that's a critical point. And when I was the first place I started hearing of this term, I'm going to mention SBOM, Software Bill of Material, is when I worked at a healthcare organization, right? And that was. We were evaluating many different tools to really understand the inventory for medical devices. And one of the things that came up is, man, we have so many medical devices and they're being shipped from the manufacturer with this software. Some of them are running legacy software, legacy OS, because that's just the way that they have to right? But many times you don't know what is running on those. I think now it moves beyond just looking at, back in looking at medical devices or OT, and we have to start asking those questions now, right? Okay, with these vendors that we are working with and the software that we are using, we may want to start looking deeper into the software bill of material, right, to understand what is behind the scenes, right, going on there. Again, because of the criticality of those relationships and the impact it can have on the organization.
Wow. Thank you, sir. That's also on the cloud computing piece. You mentioned a good point that has to be included or enhanced in your program. And let me add to that one that understanding the shared responsibilities in the cloud. Which there is a hitman going on around where you can see if you have a SaaS, you're responsible for this, and the cloud is for that one. I think is key. Man.
That's extremely important. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So next question: how do you communicate cybersecurity maturity to the board in ways to go beyond checklist compliance? You mentioned that, right? You have some that are checked, but there are other ones that are not. So focusing on real capability, resilience, and risk reduction.
Yeah. So here's how I'll put this, Alejandro. Framework alignment is important.
Okay.
I think
good start.
I think that's where we should start. That's the start of the building blocks. I think to grab a hold of industry framework, and the NIST CSF is a good place to start. And from a program standpoint, ensure that your controls maps to all your NIST requirements, right? All the NIST requirements. That's one. From a communication to the board standpoint, I think it's critical that as you map those controls, that you also communicate to the board the maturity of those controls, okay? Each of those controls. What that helps with is, it helps with clarifying what your roadmap is, right? It helps to clarify from the maturity standpoint what maturity level is acceptable at the board level, right? So for example, if you do your maturity assessment and you are at a maturity of maybe 2, right? 2.5 on some of your controls, right? Based on the control, the board might say, okay, I think based on the scale that we're using, maybe a maturity 3 is okay for us and we're okay here, okay? Because as you know, the higher in maturity you go, the higher the cost, right? So that's important. That maps that out. So being able to communicate that with the board, your alignment with the framework of choice, right? The maturity level of those controls gives you and starts that conversation around, right? Where do we go from here? What else do we need to do? It also, gives you an opportunity based on the controls to map your risks, right? From your risk register, what risk might exist as a result of this control's maturity and all that. So that I think is critical to communicate. The other thing I think is that is very important is metrics. Okay, and all metrics are not created equal, right? So, so I think, if you have your program map, right? So you have all your different components. You might have your metrics for your cybersecurity infrastructure. You might have for security operations. You might have your metrics for governance, right? From the policies, procedures, and all that. Some of the key metrics, I think, from a communication standpoint is helping the board understand, hey, how am I doing operationally from a security standpoint, right? What is my mean time to detect? What is my mean time to contain? Those are important measures, all right? Okay. So the board can understand how effective the operations center is working, okay? That is very, very important. And again, as the business, as the board makes investments in solutions, in tools, in controls, it's also important to communicate your control coverage, right? That is critical as well.
That's a good point.
Okay, so it's easy for the security team or the CISO or the manager to come and say, hey, we deployed CrowdStrike, or we deployed this amazing tool. Yay! Great, we have it. So maybe regulators come, or you're doing an assessment and you can simply, we have this tool. But what you will come to realize is in many situations, organizations deploy those, but you don't really, or you can't really speak to your coverage, right? Yeah, you can't speak to your coverage. And there are many underlying issues for that. You may not have proper CMDB in place, right? Because if you don't have a proper way to inventory all your assets, how on earth are you going to tell me what your percentage is, right, of coverage? Right. So that metric, I think, is important because it is actually a KRI, right, a key risk indicator, because if you are missing your EDR, for example, on one endpoint, it takes just one endpoint. Yeah. It takes this one person who's click happy to click on a phishing link that brings down a piece of malware and it gets detonated on that machine, and then you have issues on your network. Okay, so this to me is a very important piece, or piece of indicator that you need to report to your, among others, of course, to the board in terms of your, hey, from a security tooling standpoint, this is where we are. This is our target goal, 100%, for example. We need 100% coverage, and we are at 99%, for example, right? Yeah. And then you explain why you're at 99%. But that is very important because it shows, again, hey, we invested this money, and we are now seeing this at work, that, we have this coverage. And then, I also think that, it's as part of the reporting, it's important to report, the status of different simulations that you perform. Phishing simulations is one of them. If you're performing, which you should, right? Red team exercises, pen tests, all these things should also be readily reported to the board so that they have that, visibility into them. Again, among other
a few things.
Things that
what you just mentioned about coverage, loved it, man. Because not too many people. So the board, most of the time, is not trained to ask that question.
Right.
And CISOs are not providing that specific information, which is, I think, is really important. It's a great tool to get more resources or approval. Or
absolutely.
Because that night, what you say, 99%, that's good. But what if that 1% is 20 machines?
Exactly.
That are exposed to the exterior.
Exactly. Exactly.
Great point.
And the other one that I did not mention too is maybe someone might be listening and say, oh, he did not mention vulnerability management, right? Or vulnerabilities. But I think it's important to report on the status of vulnerabilities. But here's the thing. Depending on how it's reported, you go down into a rabbit hole. Yeah. Right? Because to your point, a lot of your board members does not understand, hey, you have X amount of high vulnerabilities. This is the CVSS score here. The patching team were able to patch these, and then we have these remaining. In their eyes, right, it's, hey, why are we not at zero?
Yes.
Okay? Asking for something that is kind of like impossible to be at zero. Correct. Okay? Because I often say it's not vulnerability eradication, it's vulnerability management. Okay? Because there are some things that you are going to have to create, maybe exceptions. You have to assess the risk and see, hey, what is the impact of this operationally, right? If we do this, is this going to break things operationally? And what is the likelihood of it? So many things there. So from a reporting standpoint, I think the evolution that we need to go through is not just reporting vulnerability numbers, right? But kind of change it to risk scenarios. Okay? So you can report on vulnerabilities, but bring it from a risk perspective. All right? What is the risk to the organization if this vulnerability is exploited? Okay? Is it exploitable? Right? That's another question. Where is this vulnerability that was detected? Is it on your external? Is it in your DMZ? Is it on your local area network? Is it exposed? These questions help to frame the communication and give more context to folks that just don't have the appetite for leave the numbers and all this to some IT committee when you're talking to IT or some IT meeting. But I think the actual information that should be communicated is around what's the risk, right? And that's what it comes.
Great point. And let me add to that, man, that reinforce that yes, it has to be based on risk, and it's important to define how you are going to say what is high, medium, or low.
Correct.
Okay, because for example, only the CVSS, it has to be the first indicator, but it cannot be the only one.
Absolutely.
If you add other criteria, you're going to be able to really say, okay, I have 100, but now I really have, these are the 10 criticals.
Correct.
Exactly. And that's more, you can manage it a little bit better.
Exactly, absolutely.
That's
and just one more point before you transition from this, but what helps with this, Alejandro, is, and again, it's a maturity process, a crawl, walk, run process. But one of the things that's critical is your CMDB, right? Where you can classify your assets, okay? So if you have your CMDB well built and everything is clear.
So for those that are new to the lingo and the industry, what is the CMDB?
Oh, I'm referring to your configuration management database, right? But usually we use that term for where ServiceNow has different help desk system has this database or inventory where you can have all your assets, right? So your servers, your switches, your endpoints. And then you categorize them from a criticality standpoint. So, for example, you identify all your servers that might be in your DMZ. What is the criticality on those? Of course, you're going to give them a high criticality because of their network location. You have your servers. Hey, these servers, they have GLBA information, for example. You classify them as critical. So, again, and this is just an example. I'm not. This is not. But why am I saying this? It goes into what you just said, right? In terms of classifying and giving a risk rate to those vulnerabilities. So you might have a CVSS score that might be high, right? However, let's just say you have that vulnerability on a test server, right? But you have that CVSS now on one of your servers in your DMZ, and there are more factors to look at there, right? But I'm just using just different examples. You have to make a determination now, okay, which one is really critical, right? Which one is the one that we need to attack first, right? Which one poses the higher risk? So the point I'm making, if you have a mature CMDB in place where you have your asset classified correctly, as you find and you perform your vulnerability management or your vulnerability scans, and you find vulnerabilities, that allows you to have a proper risk rating in place, okay? And a lot of the newer vulnerability management systems allows this by detecting, okay, the tag that you have on your asset, and when a vulnerability or a CVSS score is picked up, or CVSS is picked up on that asset, it does the calculation already for you. Does that make sense? It does the calculation for you, so it can elevate that asset into a higher risk category, right? So a lot, and it goes back again to, instead of trying to do a lot of this manually, look for the right solutions, the right tools that enable you,
that will help you
to do that proper classification and identify your risks in your environment much better. Yeah.
I agree 100%. Everybody talks about protecting the jewel crown, the protecting the gold, but nobody knows where the gold is.
Nobody knows where the crown jewel is. Yeah, exactly. Nobody. Protect the crown jewel, but where's the crown jewel?
How many do we have?
And that's for assets. But then you talk about data as well. Hey, let's protect the crown jewels. Okay, where is it? Okay, where is the data? What is the data in the first place? Correct. Okay. So even when we talk about, and I don't want to digress too much, but when we talk about DLP, data loss prevention, there's sometimes a lot of debate on this, but before you can truly implement DLP, you need to know your data. You need to understand your data. You need to know where that data is, because DLP is not just putting a DLP solution in place or flipping a switch. It's really understanding that data and applying the right protection to that data. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the DLP not knowing where the data is, to me sounds like a bodyguard. Yeah. Where, you are here and the bodyguard is like 2 blocks away.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So we talk about maturity, right? So in 2015, the FFIC CAT, the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, came out. And that was one of the first time that a lot of people start talking about maturity. Now, the FFIC CAT is gone. So 11 years later, we have new frameworks that are coming in. You mentioned that's a foundation. But in these 10 years, 11 years, where have you seen the areas that are more difficult to mature? So, for example, let me give you an example. To me, I think identity management is complicated. It's not that easy to get to a maturity level that you feel comfortable with, and also vulnerability management and patching. You have since 2006, every year you have more and more for different reasons, right? People are getting better, research, whatever it is. But those two areas, I found that it's hard to move up. So what other ones do you think is an issue?
I totally agree. You mentioned IAM being number one, right? It's a pain. And when we say IAM, we're talking about the whole life cycle management, one of them, right? Life cycle management, and entitlement management in itself, right? And just the whole governance of the process is very painful. Not just in the financial sector, by the way, not just in the financial sector, but as we begin to introduce more solutions, as we begin to introduce more applications, right, you find that becoming more and more of a problem, right? How to get a handle on it is a process as well, right? It's something that is not just the security department or the security office. It's not just the IT office. It's something that the entire business has to get involved with, starting with HR, right? From the onboarding to the moving from within the organization to offboarding, and then right you take it a step further to privilege management and privilege access management. You combine all this together, it's a challenge, and it's one of those things again where we have to find the right tooling, and not just the tooling but the right people to really I say it's a challenge because it carries in itself a lot of risk, Alejandro, because everything starts with the identity, right? And if we're not managing that aspect of the program correctly, then we open ourselves to a lot of risks. And you're right with vulnerability management, absolutely. That is also something that I think we have to start looking at from a more strategic standpoint. Because just if you go back, man, just a couple of years ago, right, maybe 2 years ago, and I say a couple of years ago, but there are still organizations who think that it's okay to maybe run a vulnerability scan every quarter. Right, and have a report that
it. They live in the past.
Just a quarter, and you just report. Oh yeah, these are just to check the box that it's being done, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think this is a process that needs to evolve like drastically, right? And use more like we were mentioning a risk-based approach in addressing vulnerabilities. We're not trying to rid the world of all findings, of all vulnerabilities, but we want to make sure that we prioritize, right, the items that need to be prioritized and address them in a timely manner. For vulnerability management, I think it's also important to ensure that we have the right policies and procedures in place that defines and governs the approach, right? Like you have the right your defined times on when items should be addressed, and that you're tracking that those SLAs to make sure that they're being met. That's also very, very critical. But again, it goes back to not just looking at high, medium, lows, critical high, medium, lows, but looking at it from a risk-based standpoint, right? And how you address those. One that you did not mention, but we did mention a little bit earlier in the earlier conversation, is data security. Data security, I think.
Yeah, that's hard to mature too.
I think that is very difficult to mature, and it depends on the size of the organization too. But it's tricky because, and you will notice that those that are harder to mature are those that have this dependency, on not just one department but many other areas in the organization, right? So again, we talk about data security. Is it something that IT or IT security can just decide, hey, we're going to do data security? No,
not like that.
No. The departments, the directors, the managers, They are the ones who know their data. These are the people that you have to work with and understand, hey, can you please tell me about your data, right? These are the people that you have to ask, hey, what do you do with this information, right? Before you can begin to put your, for example, your labeling in place, right? These are the things. So is it? And I mean, it's not an easy area to mature. Yet it's such a critical area to really get up to speed, because everything else relies on that. And we talk about, again. And I've worked with DLP solutions. That's why sometimes I beat it up a bit, because it becomes very frustrating when you're told, oh, you need DLP, and you put DLP in place, and then you just have alerts firing everywhere. Hard to manage, but you're really not making a real dent because you haven't understood the data and you don't really understand what you're protecting. So you have this guard at the door just playing whack-a-mole, but you're not really understanding what you're protecting. Before you can really protect, you have to understand the data, you have to classify the data, you have to start tagging your data, and that makes your DLP work much easier.
As a matter of fact, the out of the three that we just discussed, I think that data security is the most complicated, or the one that had more challenges.
And
it's the newest one. It's 10 years ago, not too many people were serious talking about data security. Now it's more
exactly
conversation topic.
Absolutely, it's a conversation for sure, and it's one of those areas that we, from that whole maturity standpoint, that we really, I think a lot of organizations say that we are mature, and that we're mature comes from we have DLP enabled. But if you were to peel back the layers of the onion and you start asking, do you really know where your data is? How are you protecting that data? Then you begin to see things, right? And we talk about data, and one of the things that we haven't mentioned is around ransomware, right? So we're protecting our data. How far back does that data, when I say far back, but how far do you go to protect that data, right? What is your backups like, right? How do you do backups? Where are your backups stored, right? If you get hit by a ransomware, are your backups immutable, right? Are they air-gapped, right? What does that protection look like, right? So for me, again, this holistic data security piece is something that it's not easy to mature, but it's something that is extremely critical that we delve into, that we look at, and we start asking for the budget, right? to address and put some cycles
especially also in this time of AI, which is is feed from data, so you need to really understand the protected and because it's gonna provide more benefit now that we have the tools to exploit to get out of it, the best out of it. But you're right, it has to be protected.
It has to be protected. It has to be governed.
You mentioned in I want to go to the metrics. You mentioned coverage. That's a great metric. We were talking about the vulnerabilities, not just showing the numbers, but just giving more beef to that information. So in your experience, what other metrics, your KPI, KRI, have been useful to you, you think are important, the ones that report most benefit, new ones that nobody think about or talk about?
Yeah, so those that I mentioned, for me, those are critical.
And they're great.
Okay, so the coverage is key.
Is key.
The simulations is also very, very, very important, especially around and around social engineering, right? One of the things that I often communicate, of course, and we know this, right? But it only takes one, right? So having a measure of, and I hope everyone is running simulation exercises in their organization, right? But it's measuring your users' response or your employees' response to simulated attacks, right? That looks like the real thing, gives you a sense of where you are, right, as an organization, or how susceptible you might be, right, to attacks. So those are key in terms of communicating. Then, other metrics like whether or not you're running EOL systems, part of the whole vulnerability management approach, coverage of MFA in your environment, right? Again, there are two pieces to it actually, like with your users, and then understanding, again, when we look at inventory, we talk about inventory of your assets. We talk about, but what we did not talk about is the inventory of your applications, right? So understanding your critical applications, right? Not just server, but your critical applications, and whether or not you have MFA enabled on those, what type of authentication you're using on your critical applications. This is very critical, right? Yeah. So this is another indicator, I think, that it's very critical to communicate as well to the board, right, from the MFA coverage.
Okay, good. So we have, I think that we have time. Let's see, let's ask our Brandon. We have time, two more questions. We're good?
Yeah, we got an hour and 5.
All right. Thanks, man. Our team is fantastic, man. They keep you check, so.
Right.
Tell me, Earl, what are the most effective ways of a CISO to support the business lines innovation? Digital lending, cloud, AI-enabled experience, without becoming the Department of No, which you mentioned at the first question.
Right. No, I think I like this one. I like this one. I mentioned before, traditionally, security has been seen as the no department.
Correct.
Right? Hey, we want to do this? No. I think we are in a place with the business, right? The business lines that we work with, where nobody wants to be told no. It's the business is moving at almost at breakneck speed, right? To go to market for certain things. The market is very competitive. So we can't be the security office cannot be a no department, right? So the way that I see it, Alejandro, is it's collaboration.
Okay.
All right? Being able to align with business, understand what the business needs, and instead of saying no, say yes. Right?
Okay.
But, okay?
Yes,
but. In order to do this, we recommend that you do this. Okay? Something as simple. Okay, we want to launch this application. We want to do this. Oh, yes, you can do it. But let's make sure that we put MFA. Let's make sure that we do this. Let's have this checklist of things that we're going to put as mitigating controls. And then, we can assess the risk there and give what the residual risk is. And then in the end, based on the residual risk, if the organization fails to continue with it, then it's acceptable. It falls within the acceptable risk level, then it's fine, right? But we should not be, or we cannot afford to be the Department of No. It's more about business enabling, right? And we just want to do that business enabling, but we want to do it securely.
And I love your answer. And that shows how the industry is evolving and getting mature. 10 years ago, no CISO would say that. That you need to be an enabler, you need to be the yes bot department. I think that's great idea. Now, in your experience, are you getting those business line? They want the collaboration?
Absolutely.
They don't see you like the bad guy or
exactly. And that again, everything is an evolutionary process, yeah. And we are at that place where we're seeing that the business line is seeing security as a partner, okay, and that is critical. All right. For example, when you look at DevSecOps, for example, or DevOps, right? Okay. Being able to inject cybersecurity in that flow, and there is, if you know developers well, whenever you bring up to a developer or a development team that, oh no, we want security to be involved, the first response is, oh no.
Yeah.
No, But why the no, right? Why? And it goes back to what we said earlier, because security has always been that bottleneck. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. But the problem is the conflict for the development team here is, how are they measured? They're measured based on their ability to go to market with the product that business is asking for, no?
Correct.
Right? So when you are security telling them no, you're now making enemies because these guys need to produce and you're saying no, right?
Correct.
So the approach is inject yourself into what these folks are doing, right? Understand what they're doing, right? And be able to like, hey, we want to do this? Okay. We can do it. Absolutely. This is exciting. This is a great way to go, right? However, these are the recommendations that we have. These are the checks that we want to do in place before. We want to make sure that we perform the static code analysis. Everything is green. We want to make sure we do our DAST. We want to make sure we do our pen test. We want to do all these things. And we want to make sure that when we find stuff that we remediate them before going to production. So we have to look at those things and not be a bottleneck, but more of that enabler, making sure that ensuring that we have security within the life cycle of, and I talk about DevOps, but again, it's for anything that we're doing, that security is not a stopper, right? It's not a stopper, but it's. Anyway, I think one of the things that helps with this is, and can help a lot, is as we continue to mature as organizations, that we build the frameworks, we build the guidelines, right? And say, hey, look, for API security, these are the minimum requirements, for example. So you expect this to be in place before. Deploying something into the cloud, for example, we need to have this prerequisites. Having those structures in place aids a lot, I think, and ensuring that, no, I'm a partner with you, we're going to work through this, and not just like, hey, no, you can't. Nobody likes that.
And that approach, I think that approach is going to give you way more better results.
Absolutely. It gives you support, right? Man, you want friends on all of those teams.
Yes.
You do, right? You don't want enemies because people are going to, the very mention of your name is going to, cause folks to be upset. And that's not what you want.
No.
You are a business enabler as a security professional, and you want to look for those opportunities to enable, but enable securely.
That's it. Nice approach, Earl. We're learning. You're giving us good info. How do you approach changing employee behavior and strengthening security culture in ways to go beyond annual training requirements?
Continuous training.
Okay, meaning?
Continuous training. So we talked about social engineering, we talk about simulations, right? I think it is important that we as organizations, that we continue on a regular basis to sensitize our users and to train them on the latest attacks out there, right? So whatever tool that you want to use, whatever approach you want to use, it could be KnowBe4, it could be Microsoft, it could be whatever it is. But it's important to go beyond that 1 year and say on a monthly basis, for example, you test your users and see how responsive they are to simulated phishing attacks, right? These, as I said, are numbers that should be tracked, KPIs that should be, or KRIs that should be tracked and reported so you can see the progress of those users. Beyond that, I think it's, and again, it's all maturity process, but to get security interwoven into the culture of the organization, we need to have constant campaigns, right? Educational campaigns, and not just in the form of emails, but I think we need to evolve to, the marketing teams, for example, or different parts of the business. You would see that, you go in the break room, you have these posters here about this event or whatever. We need to start bringing that culture where we have posters about cyber. And let me just mention this. I know we're almost out of time, but I was so impressed, Alejandro, when I went to Quito last month.
Okay.
To our head office, when I went into Pichincha Corp, right? the approach that they use, I saw that same approach at a different organization here in the US, where you step in, right, as a customer into the bank. And I saw this guy dressed as a superhero. I was like, but he's dressed as a superhero, but the signs and emblems and everything was about cybersecurity.
Okay.
And then you had this big screen, right, that all projected stuff about cybersecurity and testimonials and things to be aware of, right? What that showed is a strong culture, my friend, that is being propagated, right, at the institution. That awareness. And I think that's what we need in our organizations, right? Not just the annual, like, for regulatory reasons. Yes, we did the training, but to get this ingrained, right, into our employees, from management all the way down to the lowest employee, if you will, need to understand this. And we can only do that by having this, and that's why I said it has to be continuous. It has to be continuous. Another thing that I would mention is, you can be very punitive. You can be very, somebody fails, you can lose your job. You can use that approach. But one of the approaches I think I would recommend is to have empathetic reporting, if you will, right? And be kind of, how do I say it? I'm looking for a word for this. It's not emotionally sensitive. I'm trying to look for the word, but having this emotional safety, right? Also psychological safety for employees, where they don't feel like, if I fail, I'm in trouble.
Okay.
Right? But create that environment where you're not saying that failure is acceptable, but you help people to understand that, look, this is a process, and we want you to get better, right? So you encourage reporting, right? You encourage collaboration, right? That in turn builds the entire team, right? So the approach, I mean, and again, I know folks might disagree with me on this, right? Because I think some organizations go that route where, you bring in the fear factor and say, man, if you fail, you're going to be punished. But I propose a different approach to create that psychological safety for the employee as well. That it's not being, you're not putting someone in a state of fear that, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job if I fail this. But you put them in a position where, yes, I am going to be careful because I do not want my name to be on the news as the one who clicked on the link and brought down the organization.
Exactly.
But they should still feel safe that if they fail a simulation exercise, that they can sit down, they can talk with someone, they can look at their what made them susceptible to this and fix it from there. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing what you saw in Ecuador, man. I think that's a nice example of how the culture can be changed and can be used to make it better in different areas. You can use that for not only cyber, cyber. You can use it in other areas. But
exactly.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's a culture change, right? It's
really,
but it's something that is, I think, it's a process like everything else, right? But it's something I believe that as financial institutions, and I would say again, I think a lot of the larger big names are already doing these things. Our smaller banks, right? I think we need to become very conscious, right, of these programs and how we can bring them into our institutions and really, make our programs more robust.
What do you think the risk is for, now that we're closing? We didn't get too much into it, so I just want to understand your thought process. When I mention fintech and crypto, what comes to your head? What comes to your mind? What's your challenge? What's your fear? You're good. You don't care. It's not with me.
I don't want to say I don't care. I don't want to speak on it too much, right?
Okay.
To be very honest, but I don't want to say that I don't care, right? I think there are many things to balance there, right? And I won't speak as an authority on the subject. Yeah.
Well, it's new. It's very.
It's very
It's
new.
like quantum too. You have quantum,
Exactly.
crypto, fintech. Well, fintech has been around for a long time, but still that relationship with banks is new.
Exactly.
And okay.
Exactly.
Good answer. I like it.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. So, so we talk. Let's wrap it up, man. We talk about a lot of things, right? AI, phishing. We talk about the AI attack to Anthropic. We talk about KPIs, board, supply chain, vendor management, maturity. So great topic. So what I'm just closing. What would you like to say to the people watching about cybersecurity, especially of what is coming ahead? Right? I know that we don't have enough details or enough information to make prediction, but you've been doing this for a long time. You've seen how you started, what happened 5 years ago, now where you are. So what would be your closing statement in that regard? What would be your recommendation?
So I mean, my recommendation, honestly, would be one. We need to build a culture, right, within our organizations where we are very collaborative, right, with the other groups, with our other departments, that we're very transparent, right? We have to embrace AI, right? And sometimes, I mean, we say it over and over, right? But it becomes almost like, oh, AI again. But I think it's critical that as we are exploring and we are planning out our program for the next 2, 3, 5 years down the line, that whatever solutions that we're putting in place, we have to bear in mind that those solutions should be able to easily scale.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Because our organizations right now, as they are going to the cloud, right, as they are taking advantage of different services, we need to grow with the organization, okay? So even from a spend standpoint, we kind of have to stop looking at things from a CapEx model, to be honest, and more from an OpEx, right, model when it comes to cybersecurity spending, yeah? And the other thing that I would say that is extremely important is talent, okay? I think that we need to make sure that we, one, invest in the right talent, right, in our security programs and in technology as well, right? Part of that investment in talent is also building the right partnerships. And it's critical. From your security operations center to the folks that might be managing some part of your infrastructure, we have to have the right partners. There are a lot of folks out there that are, providing certain services, and those services are not created equal by any means. So understanding who your partners are, getting the right partnership, having the right collaboration internally, and investing in the right tool set, I think will help set us up for success in what is the coming years.
In the long term,
correct,
mid term, short term, agree. You mentioned good points there. Earl, I want to thank you for your time. Lorena, Brandon, our fantastic team, thank you for the support and the technical expertise. For everybody watching, thank you very much for your time. Hope you like it. You know what you need to do. What is it? Share, like, and subscribe. I don't know if that not in that order, but that's what you need to do. And thank you very much. We'll appreciate. Thank you, Earl.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure.
I appreciate your time and your sharing the knowledge with us.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.